Welcome back to Exeter and Laira. You're watching part 3 of the build series, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how I've installed all my back scenes. So it's taken a few weeks to get to this stage, so I'm going to hand back to myself and show you how exactly I've fitted all the back scenes. So the back scenes that I've picked for the station side of the layout are from ID Backscenes. I've chosen to use the premium range as they're waterproof, perfect for a loft really, and also they're self-adhesive. I've picked the Suburb series for the station size simply because I find that the image that's printed on this back scene is quite a close resemblance to the actual back scene that you typically see around the back of the actual station. As in with countryside, with obviously houses that you see here on the hillside, so quite a close resemblance. So I think this is a perfect match, and obviously because I'm modelling the location, it's got to kind of almost resemble it as close as I could possibly get it. So the back scenes that are behind the station itself need to be removable, as I'm going to be putting a 3-lane fiddle yard or storage yard behind. This will start with these pieces of ply being placed behind the back scenes, which will have about 3 pieces of track along this section, which join in around about there. So it's vital that all the back scenes are removable, obviously for things like track maintenance or any problems that may occur behind the back scenes. So taking some 12mm ply, I've cut these down into strips, each strip measuring around about 70mm, which is the same thickness as the benchwork for these to fit in between. A few basic tools, set square drill, screws, and away you go. So I've now cut those into length. Obviously each one's a different size, and that's simply because they've got to slot in between the timber that's on the benchwork. So none of that was the exact same size all the way along. There was a lot of variation, right down to quite a difference in some of it. And I've also chopped up lots of little blocks which are about 1.5 inches wide. Okay, so the top pieces I've just put a countersink on them because the screws weren't quite touching enough on the last piece. So they were just touching the tip of the bottom one. So I put the countersink there just to get them in a bit deeper, and I will now So there we go. Simple as that. Slot-in design where I can just simply pull it out, lift it up, and be able to move it around the curve of the actual roof itself. So the last piece of slot-in timber that I've done is for where the viaduct area is, and as the benchwork sits down lower, this piece alone sits all the way across the top of each individual beam. These are all held in by simple metal brackets, and again just keeping the slot-in design so everything slots in nicely between. Also it'll act as a good barrier for building all the landscape up against as well. So the material I'm using for my back scenes is 3.6mm plywood. Taking extra care to make sure that all the screws have been countersunk below the surface to make sure nothing shows through the back scene material. The sheets that I buy, they're in 6 foot by 2 foot widths, and I've used offcuts from the 15-inch cut sections to join onto pieces that have been cut from the board straight in the middle at 12 inches. These have just been joined together by a simple timber batten which has all been glued and screwed all the way along its length. Makes the back scene itself more rigid. What I'm going to do to join the back scenes together, I'm going to use a tongue and groove type system. Having one side with a tongue or an overlapped slight piece of 12mm plywood just been screwed to the side, and on the other side will be a groove where the two pieces will just lock together. I've also just overhung these pieces here, they're by about 1 inch, just lower, and they slot into the purpose-built pieces that you see around the framework of the layout. So a quick demonstration just showing you how they lock together. It's as simple as that, just push them in. And I think this should be probably the way I'll go forward with this. I like the fact that the gap's quite hidden and you can't really see it, so it's a good contrast I think and a good way forward. So let's show you around some of the back scene boards that have been installed so far. Starting with this one, the end board. This just has a simple timber bracing along the back and one upright support just to keep things in place. The join on this particular piece here, actually there's a slight gap in this one, but I'm going to use toggle catches just to pull these together so the gap is minimalised, and where it's slightly off, that'll be trimmed down. Slight bit of a discrepancy there, which will be again planed off. So the corner section, I've used an offcut of plywood just to form the corner or the shape of the curve that I require for this particular piece. And I've also used some 9mm plywood, which was also cut to the curve to use to support the bottom part of the actual back scene. As it's going to have a cutout in there for the track deck to come through, it's generally going to want to go back into its straight formation, so this piece will actually hold it all in place. I've also used this particular piece here as a template just to use as a marker, so I know exactly where I've got to cut the actual board. So the cutout will be positioned there, and that's with that piece taken out. So you can see where I've done like a little slotting design so it'll actually fit cleanly in between the gaps of these two pieces of plywood and form the straight or perfect curve, so none of it kind of pops out and goes out of shape. It will always stay where it needs to be. And that's the corner piece completely in. Quite pleased with that, that's worked out just right. And there we go. That's the last of the back scene boards all in place. All the way along the laira section is now installed. So checking through the instructions you get from ID Backscenes, they recommend that all your back scene boards, if you're making them from timber, is to have a gloss finish. So as I'm using plywood, I'm going to apply a couple of coats of acrylic and a couple of coats of water-based gloss, making sure that I sand down in between. So it's vital at this stage to make sure that the back scene itself sits exactly where I need it to be. As you'll see, looking in line with where the track deck is, there's very minimal amount of actual scenic material that you see. A lot of the houses are hidden below the track deck. So what I'm going to do is I will start the bottom of the back scene sitting approximately about 1.75 inches above the bottom of the actual piece of plywood. I'm going to start off by using the first piece of back scene material, and I've already placed the marks on this piece of back scene ready for the back scene material to line up against this particular line. I've also drawn another line just down here, which is where the corner meets into this particular piece. Okay, so here we go, the fun part. So what I'm going to do is, before I stick the back scene down, I'm just going to make sure that all the edges line up with the ply material. Not just the leading edge, but also making sure that the bottom edge lines up with the pen line that I drew along the bottom of the back scene. Important that you get this right, otherwise the back scene will be noticeably different as it runs around. So I'm going to generally start off with peeling away the protective film on the back of the back scenes. I'm going to start off with just removing around about 2 inches to start off with, just so I've got the sticky edge exposed, that I can stick that down before unrolling the rest of it. So just applying that on and making sure that it's perfectly aligned with the edge of the board. Pressing it down firmly. So I've rolled the back scene material back, and what I'm going to do is just pull the protective sleeve out from underneath as I stick down the back scene itself. Just generally smoothing down, making sure that there's no trapped air bubbles underneath. And also using a paper hangers brush as well comes in handy. Okay, now we got to the end, or near the end. I'm just going to trim off the excess protective film as it gets in the way. And then just generally unroll as much of the protective film that's left, leaving around about 1 inch at the end, so I can then just generally roll this piece of back seam material up and over the edge of the plywood. So all I'm going to do is just trim off the excess overhang that's on the top of the back seams using a snap-off blade, and I actually use Alpha, which are really good quality blades. They're precise and they're very perfect for this sort of detail work. So what I do is just use the back edge of the blade up against the top edge of the plywood as a guide to give me a nice clean cut all the way along the top of the back seam. When it comes to doing this particular edge, bearing in mind that I did put a pen line along the top edge of this, so I'm just going to trim the excess off probably 4 or 5 millimeters past that pen line, and then hopefully that when the two boards join together in the corner, there'll be a slight kind of piece of the back seam behind the other one, if that makes sense. So there we go, the first section's in, and the actual embankment side of the back seam seems to fit perfectly with the track deck. As it goes round,
the height of the landscape itself actually increases along the back scene anyway, so by the time we get round by the station there should be plenty of houses showing above the track deck height. Okay, so coming to the end of this part here, I'm going to leave this white edge on, as the adjacent piece will actually overlap this bit. Another notable thing is just be careful of preventing anything from rolling back with a sticky edge, as it did actually damage the printed side of this piece of back scene. So preparing the adjacent part, I'm just going to trim off the white piece that overhangs on the actual image side. So just generally using a straight edge and a sharp knife, trim the excess off. And then really the process is the same as laying all the other back scenes, keeping the bottom edge along the pen line and making sure that the joins meet up exactly where they need to be. So that's all the boards in place now along the Exeter St David's Station section. When it comes to this corner, I only have a small section of back scene left, which will probably end about there of this actual particular series. So I will bring the laira scenic all the way around and hopefully lose the contrast with the sky. So before I remove the boards along the laira section, I'm just going to get a pen and just draw a line down that corner so I know exactly where the back scene needs to end along there. Just a quick note that because I don't have a wide track deck along here, I'm able to fit the back scene all the way down to the bottom, which means that this is 15 inches wide, so the back scene will fit precisely along all these boards. So the back scene I'm using for the laira side of the layout is again from ID Backscenes, and again using the premium range. I've gone for the Village Long series. This particular series is available right up to pack E, and as I'm aware is the largest of all back scene that you can actually get from ID Backscene themselves. Though the image doesn't really represent much that you typically see behind laira, I hope that it will work quite well with obviously the viaduct scene that I'm going to have on the layout, and should blend in quite nicely along the rest of the section. And here we have the last corner. So there we go. There's the corner piece complete. And now that we've got lots of bits of back scene everywhere, let's get them all in. So there we go. That's all the back scenes complete. And as always, I'll be back soon with another video.